All right, guys, welcome back to the show, to probably our most special episode yet. Owner and head coach of Pro Physique, Paul Revelia, one of my mentors, just a pioneer in the industry. I spoke to you during the week and I asked you, can you just send me like some of, you don't know this, but I asked Paul, can you just send me like some of your credentials, like, you know, pro card wins, pro wins? He's like, I've never really counted it up, but like definitely over 100 pro card wins. And I was like, when you stop counting, you know that you've made it.
No, and the counting thing to me, you know, in our business, it's what have you done for me lately, right? It's, you know, it's literally, I feel the pressure and the stress every single show I go to.
Yeah.
If I don't have the overall winner, if I don't win the pro card, if I don't win the pro show, like that feels like pressure to me. Because that's the goals that I have for me and my clients. You know, competitors don't come to me to like, hey, I just like to get a top 5. They are coming to me because they want to take that next step in their career. So I've never stopped to count. You know, it's not a number. So just so you guys have a frame of reference for why I don't count, because my mentor, when I asked him that question, he said over 500 pro cards.
Fair enough.
And I'm not there.
Are you talking about our good friend, Dr. Joe?
Dr. Joe. Yeah. Dr. Joe. Basically, like if you went to a natural bodybuilding show in the 90s, he was sweeping all pro cards in all categories because he was the first person to start flexible dieting. He was the first person to introduce the term peak week. He was the first person to stop using diuretics and feed people into shows. So you can imagine the impact that had on, like when he was going to these shows, his athletes just look different than everybody, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, the numbers to me, the big important things to me is that every year I get a little bit better, right? It's not like, okay, last year I had 15 people turn pro and 5 people go to the Olympia. What matters to me is that this year I had 2 girls in the top 10 at the Olympia. I've never done that before, right? So like those little things are what matter to me, you know, like I had the most IFBB Pro wins I've ever had last year.
I love
right.
that.
So like there are for me little things that let me know I'm doing the right things. But if putting a number on my Instagram or counting up how many, so I've had people turn pro every year since 2015. So this was my 10th year coaching. So yeah, you know, and I probably have between 5 and 10 a year. So what is that? That's just IFBB pro cards. That's not, you know, other pro cards. So probably 5 to 10 a year. So we're probably in the 50 to 100 range for IFBB pro cards, somewhere in there. But
that is awesome.
It's so casual.
So,
yeah,
I know, right? But Paul, you raised like a really interesting point and something that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, just for myself, is like outside of the objective stats or data, like this many pro card wins or this many pro show wins, how do you gauge subjectively becoming a better coach? So I know when it's happening because I'm obviously investing in that process myself. But you could theoretically, you could have an off year in terms of results, but you're still improved as a coach. So how do you personally gauge that for yourself?
Yeah, well, there's another thing to remember. This sport is based on athletes. So coaches bragging about their accomplishments, that's not really effective to me because great athletes are going to succeed in spite of a bad coach. Like there are some really terrible coaches out there that have athletes do well. It's because either they know how to attract talent, or B, they just, you know, they get lucky. You know, all of us have been in the gym with that, you know, pets here, you know, that athlete that you just look over and you go, Jesus, like that's a freak of nature that's going to succeed. And my job in that situation is to make sure that I don't ruin them or I don't wreck them. So sometimes, you know, a bad coach will have great results. It doesn't make them a great coach. So for me, success is that over time, I am getting people the results that they're after, but I'm also helping them have a better experience through the prep and through the end of the prep and in between shows, right?
Yes.
That to me is the most exciting thing when I get the message when the season's over. Coach, I've never been 8 weeks after a show so happy with how I look and how I feel and where my mindset's at. Usually I've gained a bunch of body fat I'm skipping workouts. I'm mentally drained. I don't want to track anymore. And so for me, that's been a big part of it, is figuring out how to make the athlete consistent in and out of prep, because we've all got that switch. We've all got that psycho mode.
Yes.
But can you take that athlete and make them a better version of themselves when the shows are over?
Oh man, I love that, because we were talking about that the other day. We were having a little get together at my house with friends and athletes and so on. And I was saying to Pet and some of the other guys, I was like, don't look at a coach and say he's the best because of the athletes that he has. That can just be, he can just attract guys with great potential. And I think if you're gauging how good I am as a coach by this guy or Bianca or Fran or Wandy or whatever, that's not giving you a true reflection, because they would have great physiques regardless. And I think for me, and we had this conversation the other day, that's why it's so important to me, no matter what happens, to still be involved in coach, lifestyle, and Gen Pop clients, because I feel like that is where like you can really hone your skill. That's where you can really refine that art. You know, like sometimes I feel like gauging a good coach is like give them somebody like that and see the transformation that they can elicit in a person like that, like what you did with Fats, my wife.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, my favorite transformation is not the contest prep transformation. It's the lifestyle, maintain it for a year or more transformations. Those are the ones. Now, my chosen profession is coaching competitors, but I often get competitors that come to me in a really bad spot, and then I'll coach them for a few years and they quit competing and they look better than they ever looked before they started competing, and they maintain it. That to me is a really successful transformation. I think any competitor is going to get in shape. That is just the sport. Like, you can put yourself for 12, 16, 20 weeks in prep. You're going to get amazing results, but can that coach and can you take that and extrapolate it into a long-term like love of life of this sport? Mm-hmm. How many people do we know that go in and do a prep or two and then they're like, no, I can't do bodybuilding. It's not for me. And it's almost always because of the way they were coached through it. Very strict meal plans, very rigid. They were probably talked down to unsustainable cardio approaches, you know, and it's like, you know, I've had people come up to me at shows like, yeah, I used to compete, but I just can't handle the diet. And I'm like, what's the diet? You know, the same 5 foods every day. I go, that's not specific to contest prep. That's specific to the way you did it.
Yeah.
And you can see their wheels turning.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I can show you all my girls on the stage today. They're all on different meal plans. They don't all have the same foods. She's eating shrimp. She's a vegan. You know, she's a super bro. She's eating the same 7 foods. You know, like there are different ways to do this. And I think, you know, to say otherwise is kind of short-sighted, because yeah, I got clients that want to be robots. I love them. But I've also got clients that need to be flexible, and I love them too. So it's not one way to do things. And if you treat someone like that, then they're more likely to have a real problem with a rebound.
Yeah. So I think that kind of brings us to the main topic of today, or as I had it laid out, which is like good versus bad coaching practices, you know, from, I guess, the perspective of a competitor, which Pet can obviously provide to us, as well as what I can, as well as from the perspective of, you know, a really high level coach. So, you know, one of the things that I think has stood me in very good stead is that having done the sport for such a long time, I've had a tremendous amount of experience with a variety of coaches, some which have been really good and some which have been not so good, and you learn from both. But like my starting point where I think about prep was probably the 3rd contest prep that I did, and I got hooked up with a coach via a referral. And I remember I started that prep at somewhere around, I don't know, 16 to 18 weeks out, and within the first 2 weeks I was like doing 2 hours of cardio a day, basically 0 carbohydrates, and by the time I was like 10 weeks out, I was absolutely ran into the ground. I have this mental picture of me arriving at work, sitting in my car for about 20 minutes and just staring out of the windscreen going, I can't believe that the day has just started. How am I possibly going to get through this for the next 24 hours, never mind the next 10 weeks? So I think that's kind of touching on what you were talking about, Paul, in terms of just sheer aggression in somebody's approach without any concept of kind of managing a timeline appropriately and establishing a rate of loss over the course of that prep and doing things in a sustainable manner, you know, not looking further than the result on the day.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, that kind of an approach is, you know, often deemed hardcore or you're not mentally strong enough, but it's completely unnecessary. You're going to lose muscle. Carbohydrates do not prevent fat loss. You know, these are things that I've had to overcome in my coaching career. I was very fortunate in the people that I associated with when I first started. I had done a lot of research into the sport, and I probably never would have competed if that was the plan I was handed. Because at the time I started competing in my early 30s, my life was about, like, I loved my life. I loved my friends. I loved the social, you know, the gym to me was something I was going every day. And that's, someone said to me, like, you go to the gym every day, you should do a bodybuilding show. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll try that. Then I started looking into, and I found Lane Norton and his philosophies on flexible dieting, on his training philosophies, on being natural. And so everything kind of just meshed with me. And I took a full year before I did a show. You know, I worked with him in my off season and in my prep. And that was the greatest decision, because that's the greatest education I ever got in nutrition, was having to figure out how to hit my macros. Like, you know, sometimes people are like, Coach, I just want a meal plan. And I go, if I just give you a meal plan, I am doing you a complete disservice.
Sounds like me.
Your job for the next week is to look at nutrition labels, is to look at your app. It's to figure out what's in a banana. You know, those kind of things, you take those lessons with you for life. And at this point, I don't even have to weigh my food, track my food, plug in my food. I could do about 90% of prep without even tracking if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I still like to track it. It takes me no effort, so I still do it. But those lessons, if I hadn't learned them, if it was just like, here's your meal plan, follow it, when the show was over, I would have been left, like many competitors are, like, what do I do now? It's like a binary off switch. Okay, I'm not on my meal plan anymore. And then it's almost like every time they want to lose a little bit of weight, they just go back on that same meal plan, which is going to become less and less effective over time. So I just got put in a very fortunate situation where, you know, when my first prep, I was in the gym with a lot of people prepping. They kept asking me, like, are you sure you're prepping? Like, they would see me, I remember they would see me eating baked Lay's. That was like my favorite, like food in prep, because it was so low fat and it was high carb.
Yes.
And it was easy to travel with, because I had to go like straight from work to the gym, and I would always eat my pre-workout meal would have baked Lay's in it. And then they would see me doing, you know, a different workout than them. I was hitting every body part twice a week.
Yeah.
Multiple body parts in a session. So just different approaches. And I just remember them always being like, you can't prep like this. And I was like, okay, you know, I trust my coach. And at the end, my first prep, I beat everybody in my gym. We were all in the same bodybuilding class. They were more muscular than me, but I was freaking peeled, and I was drinking water. I remember I was eating the morning of the show in the athlete meeting. I was eating a foot-long sub. That's what my coach gave me, you know, because it had, you know, basically the bread had the carbs, the deli meats had a little bit of sodium. So I still use this sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm literally eating, everyone's looking around at me like I'm a psycho. Like, what is the matter with you? And I'm drinking, you know, from my shaker with my, you know, I had some electrolytes in it or whatever.
Actually drinking
stuff.
Water and hydrating yourself.
Yeah.
There's a novel idea.
And it's you know, and listen, if I lost, or if they all looked better than me, all would have been for naught. They all would have been like, okay, that's okay, good. I'm glad that I'm not crazy. But when I stripped down and started pumping up, literally people started walking over to me and go, how are you getting veins? I can't get veins today.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I was like, well, I didn't really fully understand it at that time, because I wasn't a coach. I was just following instructions. Now I know they were all taking diuretics. They had cut out water on Thursday night. They were just sipping. And they all looked great at finals because after they didn't win, they went out to had a big lunch and didn't care anymore. And they came back to finals like looking amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, you guys look way better now. So, those were the early lessons, and that kind of piqued my interest. And then it also piqued the interest in people around me asking me for their help, because how is this 6'3", 195-pound guy winning bodybuilding classes at an untested show?
Yeah.
Because I was just I was peeled and full. Like I just had that wow factor that you only get if you're really on. I definitely wasn't the biggest, most muscular guy.
Yeah.
I feel like, from my perspective, when I started, I thought, the suffering component is what was required. So if you didn't suffer, and that was the narrative, around bodybuilding at that point for me, was that if you don't suffer, if you don't embrace the suck, if you don't dig into this hole that you're supposed to get into, then you're not doing what it takes to succeed. And because I found myself willing to do that, that then told me that, okay, bodybuilding is definitely for me, because if you can handle fish and broccoli every day and, strip out all the carb sources in your meal plan and follow this for 8, 12 weeks, then surely you have what it takes to sustain that even after your prep, right? But I don't feel like bodybuilding has to be gate kept in that way. I feel like people should have the opportunity to be the best version of themselves, regardless of the foods that they eat. Obviously within the parameters that allow them to, get really lean and perform at the highest level. But it was very, if you get a coach who gets the athletes who are willing to do whatever it takes and sacrifice, the muscle along the way, sacrifice their mental health, their physical health, then sure, give her. But unfortunately, that's not what you need to be able to succeed at, a national level or whatever level.
It's certainly not what's going to be conducive to sustaining a long-term career. Because, anybody can get through that for one show, maybe 2 shows, but, eventually you break. And the harder you run a prep like that, the more that you suffer and the more regularly you do that. When you break, you break. And I think about it, that story that I just told you guys now, after that experience, I didn't compete for like 4 or 5 years. And there was a good chance. The next time that I competed was when I joined Pro Physique. And that was because I just thought to myself, if this is what it's about, this isn't for me. And then I look back in time and say, hey, if I just found a better approach earlier on in the process, I could have improved my physique so much over that period of time and achieved so much more as a competitor. But that experience deterred me so much. And I've had so many good clients come to me, including probably all of the individuals that have turned pro under me so far, where it was kind of like they expressed to me, this is my last shot at this. Like, I don't want to do this because it's broken me, So being able to offer them a new approach is game changing. And even with you, he's just a phenomenal individual, because you've never seen somebody go through a prep like this, a hard prep where I'm pushing him hard and he just always has a smile on his face, always having a laugh, always fun, always sparkling personality. But
it's because it's better than my first prep. That's why.
Experience is a great teacher, right?
Yeah, there you go. I specifically said to him after the prep, like, I'm going to teach you comprehensively how to track your numbers. And he was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to follow a meal plan. And I was like, I'm going to require you to do this because I'm also friends with you and I'm also friends with your wife. And and I'm not going to be the guy that gives you a meal plan and you telling her you can't go out, you can't eat this, you can't do that, you can't do whatever. So he learned. And how much more pleasant has this improvement season experience been?
Oh, 100%. Just thinking, I just had a trip to Cape Town this past weekend, and that wouldn't have been manageable. We often talk about, with the competition phase, the prep component, but really the off season or the improvement season is when a lot of the difficulty when it comes to tracking really lies for me, because the volumes of food, it's not easily accessible. Our food labels, unfortunately, not everything has a nutritional label on it. So, you could be guessing more often than not. But when you have the flexibility, when you have the know-how in terms of tracking, and you can understand, the volume of food you need to eat and where you need to get your food from, you can play around and make it work for you. It doesn't matter what time you're eating. You can maximize when you can and minimize, when you don't have control, and everything still works. So I have to thank you for that one, I must say. Yeah?
And you can be a bodybuilder and still have a life.
Yeah, for sure.
There you go. So
yeah, I mean, that's the best part of this sport, is that I competed last year. I can't plan to compete again in another 3 years.
And you got shredded.
That to me is the easy part. Building the muscle is the hard part for me. I know we all have different crosses to bear in this sport. But like the suffering part that you mentioned, Pet, that is something that whenever I get a client that came from that approach, and I'm like, listen, if you give me a year, I'm going to change your life. That is the most rewarding part, because I'll literally get an email like, Coach, we're 4 weeks out and I don't even feel like I'm in prep. I feel guilty. And I'm like, look at your pictures. Like that, who cares how you feel? I'm like, you have post-traumatic prep disorder. You're remembering what you went through and you think that's how it's supposed to be. I'm like, once we do a couple shows together, you're going to realize. And even on show day, they're like, Coach, like I'm coherent. I have no hunger. I have no food obsessions. Like the show is over. I don't even want to go out to eat. I don't have any food in my room. And I'm like, that's how it's supposed to be. So when you talk about like green flags and red flags, listen, I was a student of this sport in 2007, just trying to soak everything up. And I had imposter syndrome for many years, because people would say to me like, you can't do well on flexible dieting. And I'd be like, okay, well, maybe you can't, but I can't do it any other way. And then I started coaching. You can't have people turn pro. You can't have people get a pro card. You can't have people win pro shows. You can't have people go to the Olympia. You can't have people win the Olympia. I'm doing all these things in my career. I'm going to do all these things. And then now I'm actually starting to hear people be like, ooh, you're on a meal plan? That's not a good coach. I've heard that said before. And I'm like, cool.
Oh, I hear it all the time.
You should be on a meal plan. I don't like this idea that like, I'm pro meal plan. I'm not. It should be specified, like you have to eat these specific foods. We should all create our own meal plan, right?
Yes.
Based on the foods that we enjoy. You should have meals set aside, planned ahead. So yeah, I think, the pendulum swings both ways. We had this crazy macro rage where now I'm like, listen, macros on a meal plan. It's not one or the other. You can do both.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this was more in the context of some lifestyle clients that I was speaking to this morning, and it's like whichever direction you choose to go, there's going to be a compromise that's to be made. So if you're following a meal plan, you're going to at some point suffer from diet fatigue and boredom and just unsustainability. If you're going full tilt with if it fits your macros and you don't plan ahead of time, you don't prepare ahead of time, then you're going down that road of potentially lacking food quality, not looking at just general kind of micronutrition and health, fiber consumption, and also just not enough accuracy. Because if you're just tracking as the day goes along, okay, well, now I'm going to eat this. Okay, well, now I'm going to eat this. By the time you reach the end of the day, you're going to either be behind or ahead of where you need to be, and you can't make that adjustment.
We used to jokingly call that macro Tetris, because the last meal of the day was some random, I need 14 protein, 16 carb, and 12 fat. And you're like, okay, you're like looking in your app, like what do I, so yeah, but you can also get tracking fatigue. You can also get, macro fatigue. So it can go both ways. And I think in prep, the closer you get to the show, the more likely you're going to be to have like a stress break or something like that. So,
I think
planning ahead is always going to be the best solution.
Yeah, I think the principles of, both sides are what we need to take on, is that neither is correct entirely on its own. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to incorporate the principles of them that work for you and those that will yield the highest value. I think a lot of us tend to, not a lot of us, but you may find that in the world we live in, people gravitate towards one thing. That's the craze that's very popular right now. And they tend to disregard the other side completely, as opposed to trying to find a middle ground between the two that'll enhance both of them enough to get optimal value. You know, you don't have to say one thing is entirely amiss when you've got aspects of it that work for you. I tend not to get tired of certain food groups, and hopefully I could take those on to prep. But even when you can't, you know that you'll be able to find something else that'll fill that void and give you everything that you need without worrying that you're not going to reach the goals that you have for yourself, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's when you feel like you're not on prep, because you actually wake up. You know, there's a zone in prep when you're not lean, not so lean that it hurts, where you just like, you're almost like on repeat. It's like a sweet spot. You have great energy. You're getting up, you're doing your cardio, your meals are planned, and you almost feel like a better version of yourself.
Yes.
Like, you know, everything's clicking. Then, of course, there is a part of prep where, you know, the suck starts when you get shredded. But even that's kind of intermittent throughout the day, right? Versus like, you know, some people feel that way at the beginning of prep when they start doing 0 carbs and, you know, no sodium. I've seen prep plans that included like remove all your condiments, boil your chicken. And I'm just thinking like, just choking this food down sounds miserable, and it's so unnecessary. So those would be the red flags for me. But to what you said, you know, I also made mistakes in my career when I was coaching people with flexible dieting, where I didn't manage their food like going into a show. Now I actually send a questionnaire and I want to know what foods they're eating. And I want to make sure they're eating the same foods going into the show, because I would have someone that would randomly, you know, maybe I have their carbs go up a couple days out from the show. They would randomly eat something they haven't had in months.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it would cause a huge digestive issue, right?
Yes.
So, and I'd be like, what'd you have? And they'd be like, well, I haven't had it in a long time, but yeah, I wanted this oatmeal. And I'm like, oh, clearly you're bloated from the oatmeal. So now I've learned, okay, at least the week of the show, you've got to be very specific about the foods that you're eating so you don't disrupt digestion. But a little bit of bloating in the middle of prep is not a terrible thing. You know, you can learn from it.
Yeah. Pet, what as I guess, you know, Paul and I both competing, but being coaches first, what are the like big red flags that you have experienced?
Fish is a big red flag. No, honestly, for me, the lack of variety is a big issue for me. When you're cooking the same meals, I remember my wife and I having to cook fish every second day, and our apartment smelling like fish. And I'd get to work and I'd be miserable, you know, visibly miserable. And this is my first year at this company, and you know, my colleagues are making fun of me, asking me if I need a potato. You know, so. For me, having a lack of variety, removing all the delicious foods simply because they're delicious, and you shouldn't enjoy food because you're on prep. For me, I find it completely unreasonable. And, you know, pretty much not planning ahead of time, you know, that's something we did ahead of schedule when it came to prep, is that I had never looked at how many weeks we had and how much body fat I had, and basically gauged when prep should start in that manner. You know, I would always be like, okay, preps are generally 12 weeks, so we're going to prep for 12 weeks. And
that's such a weird random number that people have just like defined as, oh, prep is 12 weeks. I have 20 pounds to lose, it's going to be 12 weeks. I have 40 pounds to lose, it's going to be 12 weeks. Like,
say goodbye to your muscle as well, I suppose.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Well, so you want to talk about a red flag? I mean, you know, one of the things I'll do occasionally is go look at other coaches' price sheets. And some coaches you can pick what you want to sign up for. So you can pick a 12-week prep.
Oh my goodness.
That's not an option for us. Like, we're going to get on a consult with you and talk to you before you pay for anything, because I'm not going to have somebody sign up for a 12-week prep if it should be 20, right? So yeah, like the strategy around competing has a lot to say for how, you know, fat loss is going to be done. And if it's handled right, you know, you can push really hard to lose a lot of body fat in a short amount of time, but like the pendulum goes the other way. You're going to risk muscle loss, you know, fatigue. You're going to shorten your season, maybe your competition career, by doing it that way. So yeah, the strategy around competing, that's probably, you know, in the United States, it's something that, you know, we've got so many shows. throughout the year, that you have to have a plan. You know, the dates that are set are the national shows. Like, if my competitors are shooting for those, you know, I think I had a talk with Fran last year about your guys' schedule for the season. And, you know, there were 3 shows where I thought she should turn pro. She turned pro at the first one, so she didn't need the other 2.
Yeah.
But that block of shows for her was ideal, right? And she just got her pro card right away. But had she gotten second, a couple weeks later, she would have had another shot, right?
Exactly.
Versus starting the season in September and only getting 1 shot. So, you know, there is some strategy around competing that you need to align with your body fat, you know. But that's when you only coach competitors, which is where I'm at now with my coaching career. That's almost like second nature. I don't even think about that. Like, someone can send me their pictures and I'll be like, no, you're not going to be ready for the show. We'll look at this show.
Yeah.
You know, what's the crazy thing is that I've almost memorized the schedule now. Like, I know the dates for every single national show, most of the pro shows, all the NPC shows that I go to. I just know the dates because they're sanctioned, so they have to keep them the same weekend every year.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things, like, I think a related subject, and something that I think is particularly pertinent here, what I'm seeing, there aren't as many shows here. I think the NPC calendar this year is like, what is it? Three regionals and 1 pro qualifier.
Yeah, I think we've got.
It's something like that.
I think that can be an advantage because you're not having athletes. I mean, I've literally had athletes compete from March to December in a season before.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
here's the problem, though, from the coaching perspective, is that coaches want their athletes competing every year because there aren't a lot of shows. And that is a great, when you have a good athlete, that athlete on stage is a great marketing opportunity. And they're not saying, hey, you actually need to take an improvement phase, or at the very least, you know, a reverse diet, a maintenance phase, just to recover some health markers, recover some metabolic function, some hormonal function before you compete again. You know, these guys, who many of them are super young and incredibly talented, are just competing year after year after year after year after year with no breaks. And in my head, there's just absolutely no justification for it outside of, well, you know, your coach is not giving you better advice on that because they want you to be
so
on stage.
I got lucky again. That comes down to when I came into the sport, the concept was you only compete once a year, right? So my first year competing, I did a show in November. I did a show the next November. Like, that was pretty typical. You do the show, you try to get better, and you come back. As I've coached, my rule of thumb now is your off season has to be at least as long as your prep was.
Yeah.
So if you do a 4-month prep, you can get away with a 4-month off season. If you do a 6-month prep, you need at least a 6-month off season right before you can start a fat loss phase again. So I've just learned that the body tends to have this like clock mechanism that it remembers. And if you dieted for 8 months, reversed for 3 months, and start a diet, your body still remembers that prep, like your metabolism, your digestion, it like sets off alarm bells. And it's almost, you know, there's no physiological explanation. Someone can be at a healthy weight, eating a nice number of calories, but I'm telling you, nothing will happen. The body is just like, nope. It's almost like you got to go back to the end of prep numbers to see progress. So, and not to mention add muscle. If your job is to add muscle, that takes time. That takes a lot longer than losing body fat. So yeah, but those things were imparted on me very early on. Like, the best natural bodybuilders compete once a year, once every other year, sometimes once every couple of years, especially if you need to add tissue.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the thing for me. Coming from that natural bodybuilding background, is that you look at enhanced athletes and, you know, benchmark yourself against enhanced athletes, not knowing that, you know, they've got other tools in their repository for them to use during the improvement season, you know, during the off season, in order for them to put on as much muscle. When you start looking at your AJ Morrises and how much time they take off in order to make those improvements, you question why athletes would want to be on stage every single year if they firstly aren't reaching the goals that they set out initially because they lack something like muscle. Conditioning you can fight for because you can always work harder or, you know, give yourself better timelines to obtain it. But unfortunately, some of them don't give themselves enough time to put on the necessary muscle. And I just find that, you know, when coaches then get these athletes who look big, or an athlete who feels like they're big because they've taken an extensive off season and perma bulked, then when they start coming down, they start realizing that a lot of that wasn't muscle, So I think it's a coach's responsibility to make sure that, like you said, you have a look at the client and you be aware of where they're going to be in the next 16 weeks, 20 weeks, based on your experience.
And this is what's like such a positive thing with being able to work with somebody over a really extended period, is that you gather all that data over the years in terms of generally how they respond when they start prep, rates of loss that they function well at. And you're always going to have that line in the sand in terms of, okay, your body composition is getting to a point where we're like 16 weeks away from stage ready, 18 weeks away from stage ready. So it's always really kind of easy to manage that and not let it get out of hand if you've worked with somebody for an extended period of time. Like I'm looking at you at your peak body weight that you've ever been at now. And I can look at that and say, hey, you could get ready from 14 to 16 weeks for sure. Oh,
jeez. Let's wait though.
Well, when you have a compact schedule like you guys have, it's probably even more important, right? Like my girls, if they're not ready for a show, there's a show the next week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. There's a show in Florida. There's like 45 shows a year. That's one state.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a little bit different where we can pick a show, and then if we don't have the look we want, we can do one 3-4 weeks later, right? So it's not as hard. When you've got the season you guys have, it's uber important that you're on for those dates to get qualified to go to that next level.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the NPC here, generally speaking, has made the right decision by doing that, because I think there was, for example, an instance last year where, was it in women's physique? Where yes. at the national show, at the pro qualifier, there were only like 2 athletes in women's physique. So the rules state that unless there are, I think, 4 athletes on stage, the winner doesn't get a pro card and they have to petition for one.
Yeah.
So by doing that, I think they're ensuring that there's a better standard across all shows and that there's just a bigger turnout and more competition, so that the athletes here that are really deserving of the pro card wins are getting them. So I like that decision.
Well, and you're not doing an athlete a favor by giving them a pro card. I say, I benefit from it all the time. Girls getting pro cards when they give out 16 at one show here. 16 bikini pro cards at nationals. I had 2 girls turn pro, but they both won their class. But there was 8 girls that turned pro that took second. Some of those may turn out to be great athletes, but you're taking an athlete that's not won a class at a national level, giving them a pro card. Now they got to go compete against Daraja. Now they got to go compete against, Angelica Teixeira, Laura Lee Chapados, Jennifer Dory. Like that's your next show. There's going to be some of those girls there. And you didn't even win your class at nationals. So you're weakening the amateur level because those girls are now gone off the table. So the girls that were just behind them are going to move up versus making everybody get better that next year. So, I think maybe in the years ahead, they may shrink the number of pro cards in the United States. I think last year I did the math. They gave out 150 something bikini pro cards.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that's across open and masters, but you're talking about 150 girls that are in our NPC organization that are off the table now. They got their pro card. So now you've got 150 athletes that are not competing the next year. Because most of them aren't going to go jump on the pro stage. So, I like the way that should be handled that way. I feel like, when you keep really good competitors in the amateur organization, it forces everyone's level to come up.
Yeah.
And that top amateur, when they get to the pro league, now they're ready to stand side by side with the pros.
Yeah, the gap between, your best amateur and, an entry level pro physique isn't that great. We've got almost like a pro card gold rush in the fitness industry right now, where everyone is chasing a pro card because, that's the thing we need to attain. But when you look at physiques, is that you want yourself to be at the highest level possible as an amateur. And then when you turn pro, you have the tools that are required to be a great pro. You don't want to rush the process, because either way, what I tell people is that either way, you're going to be training, you're going to be eating, and you're going to be doing what a pro does. So if you're doing that as an amateur, or as a pro, you're doing what you're supposed to do.
Oh, I have quite a few girls that regret getting their pro card. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm never going to say their names, and they'll probably never admit it. But getting a pro card early in your career shortens your career because, sorry, when you turn pro, there's no more trophies, there's no more height classes, there's no more age classes. When you step on a pro stage, it's the most elite genetics, the most elite work ethic, the most elite coaches, and that's every weekend. So those NPC shows that were fun because you were the one girl that showed up conditioned and you can always know you're going to do well. Listen, you can show up at your best at a pro show and not even sniff the top 15.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I've had many girls just be like, I wish I could go back to the NPC, but no one wants to give up their pro card and go back. But, we'll see what the future holds. But, yeah, do not rush to get a pro card. Enjoy the sport. Enjoy the NPC. Enjoy the amateur organizations. They're fun. They really are.
Yeah, I think that probably the promoters here from the NPC also kind of realize that in terms of when you're doing more shows and the talent pool is a little bit more diluted, you get guys that are winning and turning pro a little bit prematurely. Not that any of those people don't have the potential to do well as a pro, but you also don't want to set somebody up for like failure where they're not quite ready yet. They get their pro card prematurely and then they hit the pro stage for the first time and they're just completely outclassed.
No, definitely.
You want it to happen at the right time.
The pro card process for Europe used to go through Ohio. So the Arnold Classic used to be the one opportunity for Europeans to get a pro card when I first got into the sport. I remember we used to go to the Arnold, Ohio and watch the amateur show because the amateurs from other countries were better than some of our pros. That was that show was insane. The talent pool that show up for bodybuilding, men's physique, classic physique, those guys were insane because it was literally that one shot. Like you wouldn't even put U.S. athletes in the Arnold. That's how good it was.
Wow.
They'd be like, oh, the Europeans are coming, the Asians are coming, the Italians are coming, the Germans. Now they've got the regional IFBB shows over there.
Yeah.
So I think it's changed the landscape a little bit. Like you basically get a pro card if you win an overall at an NPC worldwide show where there's a pro show, which now you have to qualify just to compete in those. Like they're building that structure out. And I think it's created a lot of growth in the sport, especially over there. But it's definitely changed the way the Arnold is. The Arnold is no longer, it's a very small show. It doesn't have anybody from Europe coming over to do it.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of international athletes now coming to South Africa to compete for the pro card.
Yeah.
The last thing you want is that people see the local competition in South Africa as an easy opportunity for them to get their pro cards because in Europe it's too difficult, and then you have the same problem where athletes that aren't quite there yet, who are better than, because our fitness fraternity is quite small in this country.
In reality, yes.
Yeah, so, you're looking at other athletes now coming to South Africa for these shows, winning their pro cards. And yes, there may be levels above where we're at currently, but they're still not quite where they need to be on the international stage at a pro show. So I think it's up to athletes to make sure that, you give yourself the best opportunity possible for you to be the best athlete possible and not rush the process.
Well, and I mean, we're talking about the red flags of coaching, and one of the things you can look at is a coach have his athlete's interest in mind or his own self-promotion in mind? I see that a lot here. I'll see a girl doing well at a show, and then I'm like, okay, she got her Olympia qualification. Now she should shut it down and try to win the Olympia. No, she'll do 3, 4, 5 more shows, get run into the ground, but it's great for that coach and that business to see that person out there all the time. It starts to build that momentum, but there is like the pendulum swings. You compete and stay that lean for that long, the body starts to fight. And so, same thing over there. If you guys have people that are just pushing people to do shows over and over, your best athletes might not show up at the best on the day when they need to be their best. I always try to reverse engineer from the end goal. If our goal is to be the best at this show, it might not be our best interest to do a bunch of shows this year. It might be to shut it down and be ready to go for that prep. So, there's a lot of ways to look at the sport and there's a lot of different mindsets. But I always think of it from the long-term perspective. I don't want people to win shows now and then be out of the sport in a year. I'd rather them take off now and be set up to win for life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, based on that conversation, because this is not about red flags, green flags per se, but, there is a narrative that pro athletes these days tend to compete a lot less than, athletes in the past where they would do 4 shows. You had the Grand Prix, you had the Olympia, you had other European shows, and they travel and do shows and all of that. And you're finding very few athletes doing that nowadays. As a coach, how do you strike the balance between, really trying to improve on your preps and see what level your athlete can obtain before shutting it down and, getting them into an improvement season so that they can make those enhancements?
Well, so I'll tell you my experience, because the Grand Prix used to put themselves right around the Olympia. So when you're talking about like Kevin Levrone and Ronnie Coleman and those guys used to go do the Olympia and then go to the Grand Prix, it was the following weeks. And they were getting hundreds of thousands of dollars at those shows. Now they don't have that. You've got the Olympia and the Arnold as the big prize money shows. The rest of them are down to like 20, 30,000. And I may be off here, but they're just not as big. And so, the open bodybuilders, obviously they're dealing with different types of cycles and they've got to come in and out of preps intelligently. I think if they had multiple big name shows back to back, you would see those guys compete. It's a little easier for bikini competitors. They're not having to do the things that open bodybuilders are having to do to compete. So you'll see them do more shows. And I think as you go up muscularity, you're going to see probably more importance placed on the timing of that part of the sport. For me, it's more about their overall like metabolic health and can I get them conditioned in time. So I always try to think of my athletes like, okay, I want to peak for their show. If it's the Olympia, that's how I reverse engineer it. Let's get ready for the show early, kind of reverse into it, and then we'll have a great Olympia. You never really want to be chasing conditioning going into the biggest show of the year. The stress starts to mount, and then you're stressed because you're behind schedule. So now you got the stress of prep and that. I always try to have a plan in place to get my athletes in front of the right judges and then bring them in the way the judges want them. That's really, the most success I've had is, I've had Daraja that placed as high as 4th, and this year Aaron placed 7th. Both of them, I was able to get them really good feedback from the Olympia judges and then bring that look to the Olympia, and that was rewarded. That's how that's done. But it doesn't benefit them if I have them do 6 or 7 shows once I've gotten that feedback. Once we get the feedback that this is the look we want, our job is to go make sure, we can maintain and one of the things I know I'm very good at is keeping an athlete healthy deep into prep. Food comes up, cardio comes down, you're still in prep. So your mindset, it's very easy for me to add 50 carbs because I know you're going to add 50 carbs.
Yeah.
Once you take that prep away, you add 50 carbs and it becomes 80, becomes 100, have a cookie, have a snack, right?
Yeah.
But when you're in the prep mindset, I always tell people reversing before a show is really the only way you can seriously reverse. After a show is over, it becomes so much harder. I always say reverse before the shows are over if you can.
Yeah. I think from an amateur level, when I'm planning somebody's season, it's very easy, as the season goes on, especially if they're almost there, and just missing out on that overall win or just missing out on that pro card, to be able to say, okay, one more show. But there has to be a line in the sand.
Yeah.
And I think, every coach and every coach for each of his or her clients has to have a general sense of how they're functioning, which is why I ask for so much kind of biofeedback in terms of how you're doing, how you're feeling, how you're recovering, how you're sleeping, etc. And there has to be a point where it's like, hey, your fat intake is here, your carbohydrate intake is here, your cardio is at this point. We're not going past that. This is a line in the sand that I'm not willing to cross. And that might be different for different people based on their level of experience and their potential and how many times that they've done this. but I think there have to be hard numbers that you're not willing to go past. And I think there also have to be subjective markers of how you're feeling, where it's like, if I push this person past this point, they're going to break. They're going to break, and rather shut it down, improve, and come back the next year. You know, I really think that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly, coaching it's a mixture of, experience and knowledge that you apply to the people that trust you with that. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to the athlete. You got to find out from them, because, there's been times where I haven't pushed somebody hard enough. They could have gone harder. Yeah. And there's been times I push people too hard. And now that rarely happens to me, because if we're deep in prep and I'm looking at the plan and going, man, 2 hours of cardio, 1,100 calories, you've got to be suffering. And then I get on the phone with them and they're like, hey coach, I can do more. And I'm like, really? Okay. let's figure out what we can do, because I try not to place my limitations on other people. Right. And I used to do that. I used to try to protect them from themselves. Yeah. Now I just realized that there's a difference. There's, some people's lives are just set up. Like, they have low stress, they have and a great support system, and you can basically push them as hard as you want. Some people, they check in and they're like, coach, I don't know if I can handle 30 minutes of cardio 5 days a week. And I'm like, uh-oh.
This is a problem.
There we go. Okay. So our only option is to reduce calories. Coach, I'm really hungry. I'm like, well, we're 10 weeks out. So either be hungry or this might not be for you. Right. So, and then likewise, like I said, I've had people that I think they must be dying, and they're like, hey coach, how are you? What's going on? And I'm like, whoa, you're chipper. Is this how you are all the time? And they're like, yeah.
This guy.
Like, okay. Yeah. We can go harder. Okay. So, I think that's where, honestly, we talk about bad coaches, right? And it's hard to label someone a bad coach, because sometimes the people that I consider to be bad coaches actually have good athletes and they get good results. But what are they doing to get those good results? Well, they're willing to push their athletes to places sometimes I'm not willing to push them. That's not the case anymore, because I go, okay, if these athletes are willing to go there, like, who am I to say, okay, if you want to win this show, who am I to say you can't go harder? My job is to do it in a manner where I manage it. Okay, we can go hard, but then we're going to take a couple recovery days. We're going to use diet breaks. We're going to have high carb days, right? Because a lot of these, bad protocols, I call them bad. That's very, it's up to the person to decide what's bad. But for me, it's extended periods of low fat, low carbs, high cardio without recovery, because the human body is pretty damn amazing. It can adapt and it can respond to things if you give it a stress response and then let it recover. Right. Yeah, yes. And so that, for me, like, when I prepped myself last year, that for me was kind of the fun of it. I'd go, you know what? Let me see if I drop my carbs to 100 and do 2 hours of cardio, what happens? And I was like, I actually feel pretty good. Then on like day 3, I'm like, uh-oh. Okay, now it's starting to hit me, right? Yeah. So, it helps when you actually diet yourself, because you know the feelings and you know what you're going through. And so when I ask my athlete, okay, it's been 3 days of double cardio, low carbs, how are you feeling? And they're like, I can go one more. Let's go one more. Yeah. Coach, I picked up a 10-pound dumbbell today. It felt like 100 pounds. All right, no cardio today. Carbs come up, or take a rest day. So you start to pay attention to those things, and then you can really get great results, because now you're using the approach that the bad coaches are using, just running people into the ground without giving them recovery. But you're giving them the recovery, and all bets are off.
Yeah, well, the bad coaching is when that kind of approach lacks context. So if it's just like, all right, we're 20 weeks out or 16 weeks out or 12 weeks out or 8 weeks out, and I'm just going to use the same approach in all of those scenarios, zero carbs, zero fats, and 2 hours of cardio from the beginning. That's the bad coaching that doesn't have context, right? And what I think is so fundamentally important is, as best as possible, trying to get to know your athletes. Because I had a guy, a local competitor who's like 8-9 weeks into a prep, doing really well, looking amazing. And he said to me on Saturday evening, he like texted me, he's like, can I call you? I was like, this is weird because you've never asked me if you can call me before, let alone on like 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. So I spoke with him and he was like, no, he just thinks that prep's not going to work now because things are too crazy in his life. Work is too hard. There's too much stress. He's not coping. And I said to him, I trained with you 3 days ago and everything sounded amazing. So I need you to go away for just the next 3 days. I'm going to put you on a diet break. And then you're going to come back to me and tell me if you just had a bad day today or if you're actually struggling with this prep. And after like a day on the diet break, he came back to me and was like, I think it was just a bad day. I'm good to go. You know?
But time, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, is that time affords you these luxuries, right? If you're 12 weeks out and you need a 20 weeks, there's no time for you to take a diet break and come to that conclusion. It's either the athlete drops out and you don't get to see them compete that season, or is that you force them to push and they still don't make it, to their best look, or they sacrifice muscle, come to that show, and all the improvements you were fighting to make in the improvement season now haven't been realized.
100%.
So you need to take as much time as you need. And as much as we've been talking about the red flags of coaching, all these green flags have been popping up because of the approaches that you both have. Is that we're now in a position where we can look at these things, and hopefully the athletes watching this will look at, their perspectives and their experiences and say, okay, no, maybe I need to have a conversation with my coach and say, listen, I need to take more time. Because I think a lot of people, when they hear you'll be prepping for 16 to 20 weeks, they're like, oh my gosh, that means 16 to 20 weeks of missing out on this and this and this and this and this. Whereas if your prep is relaxed and, fun and enjoyable, you're not missing out on anything. You get to live and achieve your goals at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, that's ultimately what I want out of doing podcasts like this. It's not, if this brings in more clients for Pro Physique or for me, great. But that's not really what I really want out of it. What I want is for the clients and other coaches to know that there is a better way of doing things. If like I can just generally, particularly locally, just help to raise the standard of coaching here in general, that's going to be a win for me, because we have such immensely talented athletes here, immensely talented, some of which have not and may not reach their potential just because the practices that they're using are suboptimal. I want to see South Africans on the Olympia stage.
You talk about red flags of coaching, not being willing to answer questions from your athletes when they ask them because they hear something,
yes,
or B, being so dogmatic about your approach that you go, I am the coach, I know best.
Mm-hmm.
No, you do not know best. Learn from the other coaches. Be open-minded. You can listen to someone else and disagree, and that's great. But you also might just pick up something and go, I've noticed this. And so, yeah, I think traits of a good coach are, they don't have this empirical value of themselves where they're like, I am the king of all coaches and I know everything. Yeah. No, they think, what is that coach doing? I literally will be at a show backstage and I'll see an athlete that looks amazing and I'll be like, who's your coach? This person. Hey, what'd you do for peak week? I used to do that a lot. I don't do it so much anymore because now I get accused, there's a lot of territorial people in sport, but I'm always trying to learn, right? So the coaches that are friendly, the coaches that I get along with, definitely we're talking about peak weeks. We're talking about different protocols that we use for nutrition, for training, all kinds of things. And just you see what works and what doesn't work. And that's really what's allowed me to kind of, take a different approach than I would say most people take to contest prep coaching. And I'm still open-minded about it. I'm still learning, right? I still don't think listen, I think I got a pretty sound philosophy. And I have a place I want to get all my athletes to, but there's different ways of doing that. And I'll never really feel like I've completely mastered it because this sport is evolving. It's always changing.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to look out for. If your coach is like, no, you don't get a diet break. Who said that? Okay, listen, I get it. It sounds odd if you don't know what it is, but bringing a competitors' calories up by a few hundred, dropping their cardio in half, and giving them a recovery week, I would say 50% of my clients get leaner that week, if not more.
Almost always.
And they feel better.
Yeah.
Stress comes down.
And you're almost like, what the hell? Like the first time I did that with an athlete, I'll never forget, because she was in prep and she had never done it before. And after a week, she was down a pound or two, and she's like, we hadn't lost weight in 3 weeks, and we're down 2 pounds, and I'm eating more and doing less cardio. And I was like, I can't really explain it right now, but okay, let's do it again. And we did another diet break week, and she lost another pound. Then we went back into like prep numbers, but now I understand why it happened.
Yeah.
But those biomarkers, those things that make you feel better, are also what make you the better athlete. Not just the suffering, right? And I think, if you can get an athlete that likes to suffer, to get them to take a little recovery, put them back in the suffering, that's when you get some real magic.
That's the best. If you get somebody that's willing to go through the really hard parts, and your job is just to pull them back when necessary, that's like the magic formula. But I've never understood a coach that won't answer the why behind something. Okay, well, why are we doing something this way? If somebody's asking me why, and I can give them clarity on it, for me, that's just an opportunity to reinforce their compliance to the plan.
Yep.
Because if they understand, hey, Matt has a rhyme and a reason behind why he's asking me to do this, they're more than likely to then execute on that. If you won't answer the question, I know my mentality would be like, screw this guy.
Yeah.
So I've never quite understood that. Anyway, we've actually reached the end of our time slot. So
coaches coach how they were taught. So like, it's like a coaching pyramid. You've got the coach at the top, and he's disseminating information. If your first coach was like, shut up and follow the plan, that's what the pros do. Well, when someone comes to you for a question, you're going to say, well, shut up, follow the plan. That's what I did.
But
right.
But I mean, at the same time, if a coach gave you that answer and you didn't like it, why would you do that to somebody else? It's just
trauma.
Oh,
trauma.
I just don't think they know any different. Well, and again, this is probably a person who's had success because of their genetics, and so they just assume that it worked for them. It's going to work for them. It's going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
I'd much rather see a coach that gets the absolute most out of someone's genetics than someone that takes someone with absolutely great genetics and just keeps them looking pretty good, right?
Yeah.
You see it all the time when athletes switch coaches. They go from, mediocre to like crazy good, and you go, okay, there's something going on here. This coach is doing something a little bit differently than the rest of the coaches out there. I got to know more.
Yeah, that hits the nail on the head. Absolutely.
I think, just in closing, is that I think what comes from this for me is that we love the fitness industry. We love, helping people achieve their goals. I love being able to achieve mine. And if you make this journey, whether you're, as you say, Gen Pop or a competitive athlete, if you make it more accessible, make it more enjoyable, more people will want to do it. And by having more people doing it, we'll see the best people on the various stages. We're going to see more people living healthier lifestyles, taking care of themselves. And it's just going to be a blast to see, more people doing it for themselves and doing it sustainably as well.
Yeah, man. I love that. It's all about sustainability. It is. You want to make
Listen, guys, the biggest regret of my competitive, or fitness career was that I didn't realize how simple it was earlier on, right? I wanted to complicate it. I wanted to do these specialized workouts and specialized cardio and eat specialized foods. Mm-hmm. And I'm 48 years old. I stay shredded and strong. All I do is walk and eat Pop-Tarts. But I know what my macros are. The walking I do is challenging, and you don't need to do HIIT cardio. You don't need to do these crazy sessions. Like, there can be value in it depending on your goals, but you can also just simplify things and just, it's one of my favorite things to do is just take someone who's so kind of lost because of all this information that's out there on you got to do keto. You can't spike your blood sugar. Insulin's the devil. No, that's not true. You can get completely shredded if you know what your calories and macros are, and you just focus a little bit more on movement, and it doesn't have to be so complex.
Absolutely. Coach, thank you so much for joining us today. That is really, really awesome to have you as, what is this, the fourth show?
Yeah. Look,
It's going to be hard to top this.
For me, personally, this has been unreal. I was very quiet in the beginning because
He was a bit starstruck.
Starstruck, to be
by
honest.
the immense YouTube
That's
fame.
weird.
Yeah.
Don't make it weird, Pat. Don't make it weird.
Look, it's just so exciting to be on the same team and to be learning from you both. You know, from watching.
So you're also starstruck by me, right?
You know, sometimes when you smell great. Yeah, from watching your YouTube videos and being here and being part of this team and, you know, having the same, you know, dream and the same values, I'm really excited for what the future holds for Pro Physique and our team as a whole. So yeah, let's do amazing things this year.
Well, one of my big goals is to get over to South Africa this year, do an event with you guys. You know, that's something Matt and I have been talking about
That is the plan.
For a while. So.
That is the plan. I would love to have you here, do an event, speak to some of the athletes, and maybe even potentially have you at an NPC show here, so you can just see what the standard is like. Because I think,
for sure.
I think a lot of guys in the US and even Europe don't know how good some of the guys here are, because they just don't get the exposure. But
I can only imagine. You know, you guys have a talent pool over there that's pretty deep and probably untapped, and they're just learning about, you know, some of the training techniques and what's going on.
Exactly.
You know, so that's always exciting, and just seeing people get excited about, you know, managing their physique and, you know, not turning it into some, you know, elitist sport like a lot of people make it out to be.
Exactly. No, it's very exciting, and it would be incredible to have you here. So thank you so much, Coach. I really appreciate you.
Indeed.
And hopefully we'll do this again.
Thank you very much.
Have a good Tuesday. Tell Fats I said hello.
Will do. Thanks, Coach.
Cheers. Take
Bye.
care.